Sure thing. Good morning, everyone.
Thank you.
Jenna O'Farrell,
Here. Good morning.
Tammy Colby, Richard Werner,
Here.
Leah Wilburn, Tom Lovett,
Here.
Kim Gleason, I see she's here. She's not unmuted. There you go. Mohammed Job,
Here.
he wins first prize. He was the first one here. Lyle Jepson,
Here.
Ray Fearon,
Here.
Secretary Boucher,
Here.
and Chair Samuelson.
Here, good morning. The first order of business is I sent to board members and had Maureen post last night a proposed revised agenda because we've had some last minute changes to our agenda. So before we do anything else, I would like to make a motion to adopt the proposed revised agenda.
I'll second that.
Okay. Seconded by Rich, I think. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of adopting the proposed revised agenda, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. I see Rich has raised his hand virtually. Any nays, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion has passed. Thank you. Having passed that agenda, I do note that I received an email earlier this morning from Katie Ballard, who was supposed to be presenting on behalf of the Special Education Advisory Panel. She is unable to come this morning, so we will postpone that until a future meeting date. With that, are there any members of the public who wish to be heard? Okay, I'm not seeing anybody. As usual, we will leave this item open and move on to other items, and I'll just circle back periodically. Which takes us to a motion to approve the draft meeting minutes from our November 15th, 2023 meeting. Is there a motion?
So moved.
Moved by Tom,
I second.
seconded by Mohammed. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none. All those in favor of approving the meeting minutes from our November 15th, 2023 meeting, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye. Aye. Aye.
All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion has been approved. Thank you. Moving on to board announcements, we've got some shifting board members today. So I know Aaliyah is not able to be here today because she's rehearsing for her holiday concert, so she will not be here at all. Lyle had indicated that he is only able to be here until about 10:30. Tom is only able to be here until about 12 or 12:15, and Jenna needs to step away between 10 and 11. So I think I did crunch the numbers, and it looks like we've got enough other members, assuming that Tammy comes. I think I'll keep an eye on it, but I do believe we will have enough to maintain our quorum and be able to continue with our meeting.
I'm here. I'm sorry I was late. Teams was giving me a hard time this morning.
Great. Good morning. Yes.
Chair Samuelson, this is Heather. I will have to leave at about 5 to 11 for a press conference, and then I'll come back. It doesn't obviously affect quorum, but just wanted folks to know I'll come back as soon as that's done.
Great, thank you. Also, just a reminder to please check your email regularly. And I know there are maybe 2 doodle polls out there, so if you've not completed them, please make sure that you do. Any other board announcements? All right, I'm not hearing any. Let me circle back again to see if there are any members of the public who wish to be heard. Okay, still not seeing anybody. which brings us to our student report. And Gray, I believe it's you today.
I know, I'm the only one. Did everyone hear me okay? I was having some troubles with my microphone connections last night.
Yes.
Okay, good. At Virgins, we're coming towards holiday break. Our last day is going to be Thursday, because then we have this Friday off, the whole next week off, and we have the Monday coming back to school off, which is always good because that's New Year's Day. So it's tough whenever that is not a day given to us. The musical just happened, or well, not the actual musical, but we're beginning the process. We used to do fall musical, so it would have fallen somewhere around this time, but we've switched recently to doing a winter musical. So just auditions and then the cast list was this weekend. So we're actually beginning our musical process at Jen's. And lots of music things are happening. We had a holiday jazz concert last night, and for the band, New England auditions for the Nympho Music Festival just happened, and there were 2 or 3 people in our school who got in, including me, so I'm pretty happy about that. And sports are the other big thing that are happening because winter sports at this point are in full swing. We just had a track meet this weekend, but there's lots of teams that are having their first meets. I don't think any team has passed their first game or anything, but we certainly have the beginning of things in place, so that's good. Yeah, that's kind of all. Not a lot's happening in the last week of school. So.
Do you only have about 10 days off for break? That seems kind of short.
That's all. It switches from year to year, but yeah, that's it for break this time.
All right. And remind me, were you in the musical?
Yeah, I'm. It's Mamma Mia is our musical this year, and I'm
Okay.
Bill. It's one of the dads. He's the adventurous dad, I'm told.
I'm sorry that I'm not closer to where you live because it'd be fun to come and see it. Any questions or comments for Gray? Great.
Maybe keep us posted, Gray, on the dates and times when you have those set for the event. Not so far from Grand Isle. So anyway.
All right.
All right. Well, thank you very much, and I hope you have a great break.
Thank you.
Okay, I'm going to circle back one more time to see if there are any members of the public who wish to be heard. All right, we are super ahead of schedule. Actually, maybe what we can do is, we're skipping over item E because Katie Ballard is not willing or not able to be with us. Heather, do you want to give the secretary's report now?
Sure, happy to. So I think I'll frame it around a couple of different updates that I think are important for the board to be aware of. So first is just a summary of the impact of the rain event, flooding that occurred on Monday. I wanted to start by saying, and I mentioned this a little bit yesterday at the press briefing, I really want to commend and thank our local education leaders and our education system, because we really did have what I called at the time, and I still believe, a mass dismissal event. So, it really was the case that, so we had 120 schools that were closed shortly after, I'm sorry, we had, wrong, I want to make sure I get this right. Yes. So 120 schools were closed early on Monday after they'd already come, because this really did kind of take everyone by surprise in terms of the amount of rain that then impacted tributaries and also streams, as I was saying before we actually formally opened the meeting. So a lot of this was framed around making sure kids got actually home before roads were washed out. And so 120 schools, that's thousands of kids. And I really just, again, want to commemorate and, commend our schools for doing what needed to be done. It went pretty seamlessly. And the other thing I want to note is that all kids were fed. Either they were fed right before they were transported, largely by bus, or they were sent home with some bagged lunches. And so I think that's also pretty amazing, and just testament, I think, to our schools, to the care that they provide for our students and our families every day. So as of yesterday, we had 6 districts that still were remaining closed, and those were Harwood, Union, Lamoille North, Mount Mansfield, White River Valley, Orange Southwest, and Orleans Southwest. And they were closed in full. That was a total of 54 schools. Many also, as you probably already know, reported typically a 2-hour delay on Tuesday, largely because, again, they were still navigating alternate bus routes and figuring out how they were actually going to get students to school. To our knowledge, no one is anticipating closures as of today, so everyone is back in business. Moortown so far has been the only school, Moortown Elementary has been the only school that has reported significant damage. They had damage to their heating system, and they had several classrooms that were inundated with flood waters. So they have come up with they worked so hard yesterday, and I really want to commend the superintendent, because they worked so hard and came up with a great, creative, fun plan for students for the rest of this week. So they're doing some interesting nature-based educational activities. They're spending Friday at the high school. So they did such a great job of just some really creative, again, thinking outside the box, last minute thinking, and planning. And I just want to commend them. We had a couple of schools as well that lost softball fields, which is really a bummer, because I understand one of them, this is a repeat occurrence. And so the same field had been lost in July. It had been repaired, and now it's lost again. So the other thing I want to note is that I think we all can appreciate that this is really anxiety provoking for many students, for many families, certainly for many educators. And for some, it's even traumatizing, just because, especially after the impact of COVID, then July, and then this. And a lot of our more vulnerable neighborhoods and regions are the ones that keep getting affected in these natural events. And so I just wanted to acknowledge that, and I'm sure that you can all appreciate that. I'm happy to take questions too, but the other piece I wanted to just note is an update on Wyndham Elementary School that you may have been following in the news. So this is the first time that we've had a school closure based on, so for the rest of the year. So I'm not talking about a temporary closure of a few days. So for the rest of the year, Wyndham Elementary is closed because they have been unable to find qualified staffing for the school. So the board voted that was what they wanted to do, and it was based on aspects of Title 16 that allow a local board to make that decision if they can't furnish a solid education for their students, and they made that call. The process requires the secretary to advise / approve that, and so and I did, because I think that they did, they followed the law. I think it made a lot of sense, and that's where we are. So that doesn't necessarily imply anything about next year's operating status, but it did just for that school. They'll contend with that as well, and they'll think about that. So I just wanted to make sure that everyone was up to date on that. I think I'll also share, we've had several really nice accolades at the agency, largely in our student pathways division. And I think what I'll do is follow up with just a written memo about that, because I think it would be very important for the board to hear about the wonderful and cool things that are happening in the agency as well. That's it.
Thank you.
You're very welcome.
Heather, I'm curious because I saw that one of the schools, it was at Moortown, was dismissed by 8:30 in the morning, like students arrived.
Yes.
So as a practical matter, like what happens, you know, as I'm sure parents like drop their kids off or, you know, put them on the bus and went to work. So I'm just curious, like what happens?
I think that they engaged in a well, first they had to make a decision, meaning the district had to make a decision. So Mike Leichleiter, the superintendent, he's very strong. So he at 8 o'clock, I had a text from him saying, like, I think we're going to have to close school because we're starting to get water in our classrooms. And so I said, proceed with caution. I would advise that you do the most cautious thing, which means if you think this is going to happen, then yes, let's work towards sending them home. But yeah, it was very rapid. So that was the school that really it was most affected, and they had the most tight turnaround. So they I don't know the details. That would be more I could ask Jill Briggs Campbell, or even you could actually probably invite Mike. He'd probably love to come and just give you the not even the bird's eye view, the actual view of what that was like in the moment. So, but yes, I mean, literally the students came, they had probably been there half an hour, 45 minutes, and then they had to turn around. And there were others also that were close. So I know Montpelier Roxbury, because of their students in the Roxbury Elementary School, really, they had to actually move very quickly to make sure. Again, like they were, most schools were trying to get kids back home to make sure that they didn't get left out and not be able to get back home because of the washed out roads and things. I would presume, I mean, all schools have like a continuity of operations plan, and that involves a way to actually mass communicate to families. I was a little bit on tenterhooks because I felt a little anxious myself about how this was going to be coordinated, because parents had also gone to work. And so how are we going to get the kids back? But it seems to have all worked out. And I think it's another good lesson of, our local entities know what they're doing. And, I think this really showed that. I mean, I hope we don't have to ever do this again. It's different than when you have like a snow close day or dismissal. There's usually more time. And I think one of the things we've realized is how fast, in our state at least, but I think in other states, how fast this water can become dangerous. They're really, and someone asked yesterday, I'm sorry, I'm kind of waxing philosophic on this, but I think it's a really important point for us to, I mean, this will happen again, hopefully not the mass dismissal aspect, but we are going to continue, I think, to get water events like this. And there really wasn't a way to actually, like at 5 a.m. when superintendents typically make their calls about what's going to happen for school that day, there really wasn't an indication that it was going to be this bad. And so they made the right call, and then they made the right call a few hours later when it seemed okay. This is a lot more rain than we thought. A lot more snow has melted than we thought. So
yeah, it's a lot of coordination.
Absolutely. And they were great. They all worked with their local safety folks as well, really well. And we've all invested in that as a state. We've invested in really tight communication channels, and I'm very proud of that work that we've all done collectively together. Mm-hmm.
Thank you. Tammy?
Yeah, I was just going to echo Heather's comments. As a parent who was affected by that, I will give a shout out to Libby Von Steele and the Montpelier Police Service, who were very much on top of it and communicating with parents regularly. We started getting updates by text, email, and phone around 10 a.m. They did need to send students home from Roxbury, but I think it is to all the things that Heather just said. Mike Leichner over in Harwood is terrific, but Libby did a great job, and I think it's really great to see sort of how that ethic of care for students takes a priority, health and safety, things like lunches, but also recognizing that maybe not all parents could get there, and they had plans in place for students for whom parents could not get there quickly. But I think that's a real testament to sort of what a great educational leadership we have in the state, that can not only sort of react and pivot in that way, but also keep sort of what is most important in mind, which is, the health and well-being of our children. So again, I'll echo Heather on that. I think it was a really commendable job by a number of superintendents this past week. Thank you.
Thanks. Rich?
Thanks. I wanted to shift gears. So Wyndham is in our SU, and we've been aware of the issues going on in Wyndham, but also our board oversees Dover and Wardsboro. And in Wardsboro, this early in the school year, we had a staff member's spouse pass away unexpectedly, very unexpectedly. And that staff member decided to take the rest of the year off, had some issues to deal with the family and her husband's business and whatnot. So we advertised for a teacher like from the middle of September, and we were had made a motion to close the 6th grade in one building to allow parents to tuition their students or to come to the Dover building. And it just, we had ads everywhere. We called people we knew. We called retired people who thought they might like a job. So I was wondering if the secretary could speak to how hard is that? I know everywhere. I mean, I used to have 30 something employees, and now we're down to under 20. And is there a way for us to encourage, or is there some way we can maybe be of assistance to other districts to are there other school closures because of not finding staff? We also struggled finding an extra nurse. We had a student that required more supervision than just an occasional visit from a nurse, and the schools are smaller, so we don't have full-time support in those positions. And if you can't speak to it now, that's great. Maybe we can talk about it later. But I kind of always thought, is there something we can do as a state to encourage people to teach, or and I know the agency has always been very supportive by and I'm going to get the term wrong, but it's certified people who maybe aren't certified as a temporary thing, as long as they work with certified staff. So I think like with the flooding, I think that's going to be the way for a little while longer till things change a little bit.
Yeah, it's a great question. We actually have several statewide initiatives going on to boost the educator pipeline. So, and I'd be happy to come back in and do a more maybe formal presentation on update on these. They're just, a lot of them are just getting started. It's a national issue. Teacher shortages is a national issue, and so some of the initiatives we have boosted supports for peer review, which is an alternative way to get one's educator license without having to go through a formal teacher preparation program. We have supported a really great pilot project up that John Castle, former superintendent in North Country, is leading up in the Kingdom, where he's actually building he's piloting a really robust set of career pathways that actually will incent and support both para educators and then also high school students to get excited about teaching and get them fast tracked, still holding quality. And then we also very recently, and this is pretty cool, the Vermont Department of Labor actually got a federal grant to develop a registered apprenticeship program for teachers. And so that is being launched as we speak. And I'd be happy again to come and update the board. We have not seen any official closures, again, more of a permanent nature, Rich. such as the one that you're talking about. But I do think it's something that the board needs to be aware of and perhaps even ready for. We really do have demographic challenges in our state, and it's both in terms of our workforce and then also in terms of the number of students we have. And so we are going to, I think, see those continued pressures until we can figure out a way to hopefully expand our population here. So hopefully that gave you a little bit of information and response. I'm happy to talk in more depth anytime about these on these questions. It's really important.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. Any other questions for Heather? All right. Thank you so much for presenting. So I'm going to circle back one last time to public comment. I do know that Sue Siglowski is here, and I'm wondering, Sue, not to put you on the spot, but I did see that the VSBA is putting together a task force to address concerns regarding the failures of the State Board of Education and/or Agency of Education. And I didn't know if you'd be willing to speak a little bit about the context of that resolution, just to help us understand, what's going on. Okay. I'm not hearing anything. Certainly, I would be interested in understanding better what's going on. So Sue, if you want to send an email to the board, we can be in communication maybe after this meeting. But something that I saw, and I know that the board tries really hard to be good partners with the various other facets of our educational community and work together. So I was a little surprised to see this, but I would definitely love to understand what shortcomings you've identified and really try to help us to grow. So thank you. Okay, that takes us to the end of public comment. And at this point, we are going to move on to an executive session. So I am going to move pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1 that the board finds that premature general public knowledge of confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the State Board of Education would clearly place the board at a substantial disadvantage. Is there a second? Seconded by Tammy. Any discussion? Okay. All those in favor, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay. Hearing none, the motion has passed unanimously. I will now move that the board enter executive session to receive confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the board pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1 capital F. Is there a second? Seconded. I didn't see who seconded.
Lyle.
Thank you. You're not on my screen.
All of us.
All right, thank you. All those in favor, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 Aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay, the motion has passed unanimously. So board members, just keep in mind, we are going to leave this meeting and we have 2 executive sessions today. So just make sure that you enter the executive session. I think it's labeled starting at 9:20. We're a little bit ahead of schedule, but I will see you all in executive session. Thank you. Wait for us to hear our presentation from Bob, or if you need to be going and Bob can wait. So it's just a question. I just want to make sure that we're not making people wait unnecessarily. And I'm sorry that we're off schedule.
Thank you, Jennifer. No worries. I think I can speak for my team. I think we're all feeling pretty flexible this afternoon. So whichever order you'd like, we can stay right in the order of the agenda and that would be fine.
Great. Thank you very much.
Sure.
So Bob, and are you able to stay if we take you up now?
Absolutely.
Okay. So let's do item J, then item K, and then I will go back to item H. So with that, this is item J, and just to kind of set the table on this agenda item, at our September board meeting, I had named Tammy and Rich to work with the agency on updating school facility standards as required by Act 72 of 2021. Tammy and Rich have had a couple of meetings with Bob Donahue, who's with us today. Bob is the school facilities program manager, and they also met with Jill Briggs Campbell, who's the agency director of operations. As a result of these meetings, the agency has prepared a green sheet in your agenda packet, which I'm assuming everyone has had a chance to review, along with a recommendation. So at this point, I will turn it over to Bob and Courtney, as well as Tammy and Rich, to answer any questions that board members might have before we move this to a vote.
And Jennifer, is it okay if I interject? Jill Briggs Campbell from Agency of Education. Great.
Sure.
Courtney, you do not have to respond on the capital outlay funding formula. So just wanted to briefly introduce myself and then very happy to hand over to Bob. Jill Briggs Campbell, Director of Operations at AOE, and just signaling to the state board that this is a newly formed team within the Agency of Education. We sit directly under the secretary. As you've already pointed out, Jennifer, so we've got Bob as our first ever Agency of Education School Facilities Program Manager. I suspect you'll hear from him again at future dates. And then Courtney O'Brien is now also on my team, and she's our Operations Manager. So her title has also changed recently, and is heading up our district quality standards efforts. So with that, if there's no questions on the actual operations team itself, I will happily pass back to Bob, Tammy, and Rich.
Thank you.
Mm-hmm.
Perfect. So what is the intent that I just review the green sheet and then field any questions to give a little bit of history behind what's the requirement for the COF update, or how would you like to proceed?
Sure. If you don't mind giving a little bit of background, and then board members can ask any questions that they might have.
Okay, so for those that aren't familiar with the COF acronym, COF stands for the Capital Outlay Financing Formula, and it was part of the state school construction aid program when there was a construction program, and it served a twofold function. One was to calculate what the state contribution would be towards a construction project, but it's also used in the excess spending adjustment calculation. So it has a twofold purpose. Since the state school construction aid program was suspended, the numbers that were used for calculating project costs and what the state would put towards that have been outdated. The program was suspended in 2007. In 2008, that suspension was extended, and it has remained suspended since that time. And as everybody is aware, inflation happens, price escalation continues to increase. So over time, the unit construction costs that were part of the COF formula have become outdated. So when we think of the COF formula, there's really three components to it. One is a set of tables that sets the minimum square footage for services and programs within a school based on grade range and student population headcount. So those costs would be one element of the total calculation into the state's contribution. There's another table that would cap the maximum square footage by grade range, by head count, that the state would also consider. And then the third table that went into the calculation is the one we're specifically talking about updating today here, and that is the unit construction costs associated with the actual building of a school facility. So even though the COF formula has multiple tables in it that are subject to review by the SBE and will be a subject of interest as we move forward with a potential reinstatement of some kind of school construction aid program, the specific ask on this green sheet is updating the unit construction costs for school building construction. So in your table, as reference, there is a table that shows what the unit costs used to be when there was a construction aid program. And there is another table that shows what the proposed unit construction costs could be should you give it approval today. And I went through a little bit of a narrative describing what goes into a total project cost and the breakdown of a construction project into its sub components. because there are site costs that every one of us who's ever built a house, you know, you get your house site and you may have to clear the trees to make way for the foundation to get put in and the driveway to go in. So there's site clearing costs. If you're dealing with a school construction program where someone's renovating, they may decide to do some demolition of existing facility or a portion of the facility. And so there's site demolition costs. And then there are the actual hard costs that when you go to a contractor to say, what's it going to cost to build this building? They come up with their costs associated with the direct cost of construction. And then on top of all that, that goes factors into the total project cost. There are all the soft costs. They're not anything to do directly with building the building, but without these soft costs, the contractors wouldn't know what to build. So they're all the engineering that goes into designing the building, the architectural fees, any kind of permitting fees for the acquisition and or code compliant reviews by code agencies, and then anything that would have to do with understanding site-specific hazards. Are there any kind of environmental contaminants in the soil? And you have to deal with those. So all of those professional engineering and design fees are all captured in a soft cost category. And that soft cost category can add 20 to 30% to a total project. But for today's purposes, the table that we're looking at you considering is simply to do updating those unit construction costs for actually building a building. And so the data that was used to generate these numbers was solicited from a variety of architects, a variety of construction estimation companies, and then a variety of contractors. So whenever we try to make a one-size-fits-all dollar value cost apply to every project, on some project, these costs may seem higher than they ought to be. And on other projects, they may be woefully lower than they will be. Because if you look at some of the research materials that went into developing this, if you look at the email from Joe Aja, the director of BGS for Vermont, they had one site where the unit cost for site work was $33,000 a square foot. And here we're talking about maybe $12.50 a square foot or $19 a square foot for waste treatment handling. So when you see the realities of what costs can be out there, it's very difficult to say that any one specific number is actually going to accurately capture what cost any given project will do. But given that, we have to be somewhere in the range of what the market sector is demanding for construction costs. And so this was a best effort attempt to try and get to these numbers. When you look at other states around us, right before this meeting, I checked with New Hampshire again, and they have updated their cost sheets recently. So everybody is trying to figure out how do we go about doing this. The reason it's important now, even despite the suspension of the construction program, is if through the task force that's now been meeting to discuss what are we going to do with all the facilities assessment data that was generated through the field facility assessment work. Once a program gets reinstated, having accurate costs will be helpful for school districts to know what they could rely on from a state contribution perspective. And then also in terms of that excess spending adjustment. And even though excess spending has been postponed or suspended till 2029, it's helpful for schools to know what they could anticipate their excess spending adjustment to be going forward. And these numbers being accurate is important, because if the numbers are woefully representative of true costs, it's really like a penalty to the school district, because they're allowed to back out valid construction costs from their per pupil spending calculation. So the more accurate we can get this, the less penalty, or it takes a lot more spending on the school district's part to reach their spending threshold. So that is a quick summary of what led to this. Act 72 is what's mandated that we update the COF formula. And this is just one aspect of it. And as we move forward with the school construction program, there may be interest in looking at the minimum square footages for programs and services. And there may be interest in looking at not restricting maximum gross square footages. So, okay, Tammy, I see you're up.
I'll let Rich jump in too, but I just want to say thanks to Bob for his hard work on this. I have to say he did just a terrific job being systematic and clear and thoughtful on this. And we know how important this is, particularly to districts like Burlington, who are in the throes of having to figure out sort of some construction challenges. So I really appreciate the work that Bob has done. We have met a couple times, and I can sort of share with the board my perspective, which is, this feels very complete, systematic in its review, and certainly well within sort of the expectations of what we should be approving. So I'll just stop there and let Rich chime in. I know he's also been involved in the conversations.
I think that it's a no-brainer. I just look at what our costs actually are or what we've had that has been approved and what the new recommendations are. And if anybody can build for what is allowable now is a magician or a cheat or a thief. So I would recommend, and I'd like to just make a motion that we adopt the updated numbers as presented, I guess. Chair Samuelson, if that's okay.
Well, I do see that Jenna has her hand up. Would you be able to withdraw your motion so we can hear from Jenna, and then maybe I'll turn to you to make the motion again?
Yeah, or we can just die with no second.
Thank you, Bob and Tammy and Rich, for doing this work. I just had a question around, was pre-K given any consideration into the K-6 costs when that was built out? Because we have a lot of schools that have pre-Ks, and pre-K actually, when you're building a pre-K, costs a lot more than a regular classroom.
No, I did not go out for any solicitation on pre-K numbers. So that's interesting. So you're saying it costs a lot more. It requires a lot more infrastructure interior to the classroom?
It does. There's different ratios for square footage per child, and it needs to have internal bathrooms, and the bathrooms need to have different accommodations to them. So it's less standard than all the other parts of an elementary school.
Okay, yeah. So that would be a great case for reviewing the minimum square footages that are allowed for program services and then the maximum square footages. So I think this is a great segue into that discussion. We're talking about just the constructability costs, but I think what I'm hearing from you is we may have to look at what does a pre-K entail and then add that and modify or amend whatever other tables are in the COF formula.
Also, pre-K has outdoor requirements too that are pretty restrictive in terms of also like square footage, but materials.
Materials, right? And then I don't know if it requires a certain amount of fencing around, any areas outside. Yeah. So these are wonderful points to consider as we move forward with a whole school construction program.
Okay, thanks.
But Jenna's point doesn't change the figures in table 2. That would have no effect on the figures that you're proposing.
Well, I guess I think in a gross level, no. In other words, I think these are in the ballpark. If there's going to be any kind of corrections, I think it would still be within the margin of error that these numbers themselves already inherently have. That's what I think. Yeah.
I think it'd be just adding a row, right? Just revising the table at some point to add a row that included pre-K.
Mm-hmm.
And I'm trying to flip through my green book very quickly, which never happens very quickly. But I just can, Bob or maybe Jill, can you confirm? I think the board is charged with reviewing this from the perspective of K-12. It does not, Jenna, I agree with you that we need to have PK in there, but I think for what we have to consider today is, can somebody just confirm that it's K-12 is what we're required to approve or not approve?
Jill, you're muted.
Sorry, apologies. Yeah, Tammy, that's correct. That's the sort of original charge of the board, but absolutely, Jenna, I think you're raising really important questions for a future look, and that we're really dealing with this at the gross level and not the more detailed level. And Tammy, I think you've also
I could agree with Jenna more. I just wanted to be clear about what we needed to vote on today.
And these numbers are supposed to be updated yearly. Is that correct?
Yeah, I think at least yearly, and I think there was some discussion about, does it preclude you? I think there's a statement in there that says the SBE shall review yearly, but does that necessarily preclude you from consideration at a more higher frequency depending on what's going on?
Okay, so you could come back to us with revised
You're
figures.
gonna throw some wood in there, eh?
Yeah, I can do whatever somebody's asking me to do to try and help make everything more accurate for sure.
And given Rich's points about and Doug and Bob's points about the instability in the construction market and prices and inflation, there could be good reason to review these more frequently than annual, right? And so, to their point, there's nothing that prohibits us from looking at these more often. And so if we have concerns, we certainly could ask the agency to take another look at it.
Or alternatively, if the agency had concerns, you could reach out and say, hey, we'd like to come back and appear before the board with some updated figures for your consideration.
Right. I think that's right. Yeah, I know Jill and I had gone to a National School Facilities Conference down in DC back in November, and some states were starting to report over $1,000 a square foot for total project construction costs. So I think it's a dynamic market. There's nobody who can predict necessarily what's going on, and I think price instability is just a given in this climate.
Okay, thank you. Mohammed?
Hey, Bob, thank you for all your hard work and thank you for being here and explicit with us. We're not much about construction, but we like a roof on our heads. My question is, you just said the unit cost is to be revised yearly, but you're not so sure whether that actually happens. But I want to just be specific. When can you confirm when this had last been updated? Was it updated last year, 2 years ago, 3 years ago?
No, I don't think.
Last updated?
I think, well, if Cassandra's here, she could answer that, but I would think it'd be more in the neighborhood of 2008, 2000.
Yeah, I'm asking this question just, there are many schools that went under construction very recently, that completed their construction recently. Would these changes in numbers give them a rebate or help them in some ways after the fact?
I would not be the one who could answer that question.
Thank you. Thank you, Bob.
Yeah.
Any other questions or comments from board members? All right, hearing none. Rich, would you like to make a motion?
Sure, I'll move like I did before, that we approve these numbers.
All right, thank you. Is there a second? I'll second. Any further discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving, I'm going to read the recommended action. All those approving the updated capital outlay financing formula by replacing the existing unit cost table on page 68 of the 2008 Vermont School Construction Planning Guide with the proposed unit cost table 2 below, so that construction unit costs are more reflective of the current construction sector pricing. Please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
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 All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion has passed unanimously. So Bob, Jill, and Courtney, and Rich and Tammy, thank you all very much. This is a huge jump in figures, which obviously reflects the need for this work to have been done. And I really appreciate the thoughtfulness that you brought to this. Thank you.
You're welcome.
All right. So Courtney, I believe you were staying with us. This is an update on the district quality standards. And just as a reminder, Act 127 of 2022 amended 16 VSA Section 165 to require the agency to adopt by rule district quality standards regarding the business operations, facilities management and safety, and governance practices of school districts in order to strengthen the regulatory framework in education. The act further required the agency to develop a process of school district quality reviews to be conducted by the agency. In response, the agency created quality assurance rules that pulled elements from the education quality standards and the new district quality standards. The agency received input from the board both during the drafting phase and during the public comment phase. The rules went through the formal APA rulemaking process and will become effective on July 1st, 2025. And Courtney, I believe you have a presentation that has been included in the agenda packet and will be presenting an update to the board.
Yes, ma'am. Thank you, Jennifer, for that very great introduction. So I think before we jump into the presentation, I'll just give you a preview of what to expect in the presentation today. We did include a brief refresher, primarily to continue to help socialize the language that we're using around DQS. We had quite a bit of a pause on this work this summer, primarily led by the July flood. Our team was focused on emergency response for a period of time. And so we are starting to resume this work. We are engaging with teams out in the field, particularly those in the districts in the business manager role and business offices, and we'll be starting to integrate some additional stakeholder work over the next 6 to 9 months as well. So we'll do a quick refresher. I'll provide some information, again, as a reminder about the quality assurance process. I think it is important for us to be familiar with the language used and to understand what that process will look like and how it is different from what we currently have existing. And then we'll end with a high-level summary of the work to come. So we have a project plan in place. We have an idea of the work that needs to be completed over the next 12 to 18 months to get this ready to go for the July 1 implementation date. And I would love to share that with you today. All right. Just queuing up my slides. Okay, so I'll move forward somewhat quickly in these introductory slides. We've talked about these already this afternoon. The AOE operations team, again, is a new team. Myself and Jill Briggs-Campbell are working on this DQS project right now. Again, we will be bringing in some assistance from other members of the AOE to help, but we will be your primary contacts for all things DQS. So when we talk about DQS and district quality standards, Jennifer provided a great summary about the legislation that created this project. We are now an adopted rule, or we now have an adopted rule, which is published on the agency website under a new tab for Agency of Education rules. So previously we had state board rules. We now have 2 separate tabs, one for State Board of Education and one for the agency. This is Rule Series 100, and there is a link to that rule, to the rule in your slide deck materials for today. The rule itself, while we refer to it as District Quality Standards, that is the title of the rule, it does include 3 main components, one being district quality standards. These are new regulations on district level operations and logistics. We'll talk in a moment more specifically about those. The rule also includes the quality assurance regulations, or that district quality review process that Jennifer referenced just a few moments ago, and reporting and public transparency requirements. So within the rule, there are certain obligations on the agency to report the results of said district quality standards and their outcome. The rule is applicable to only public supervisory unions and districts, so that is an important distinction. This is not applicable to independent schools, and at this time, we have not integrated independent school into this work. And the rule is effective July 1 of 2025. So we are aiming for an implementation, hopefully in the summer of 2025. I think our timeline is reasonable to achieve that, but again, we will see what the next year and a half brings. I like to remind folks about why we are doing this. To me and to our team here, the reasons that we do the work we do are really important, and this feels like one of those really direct connections to the agency's mission in providing equitable access to high quality education. In order for the agency to do that, we have to, right? We don't have the capacity to do all of the things. Nobody does. We need to delegate downward into the education field. And right now, that district level is a a leverage point that we haven't utilized in rulemaking or in regulation quite yet. As part of that delegation, we do need to require assurances from the delegates to support success in that work. And leading up to the legislation, Act 127, which created the need for this work, there were observations of significant process variability in the education system. So thinking about districts, from district to district, processes were very different. Even within some districts, we had districts that felt a bit disconnected. Some were functioning very well, and some were not functioning at that district level at all. This variability has only been exacerbated by things like the pandemic, labor shortages, and increased staff turnover, which as we know, we have not really seen a slowdown in staffing turnover and labor shortage needs in the education field. So what are we expecting? We do expect that implementing some quality assurance mechanisms around those district level core processes will result in a way to address persistent quality concerns. We will again have some clarity on what does quality mean in some of those functions. Reduce equity gaps. We will again have minimum levels of quality requirements for all districts to achieve. And mitigate the impact of staff turnover. The theory here being that if there are very clearly defined priorities and expected outcomes for the operations and logistics of running a district, that will be hopefully easier to achieve when there are major staffing impacts, when there are full offices or leadership roles that have turned over in a short period of time. From the agency perspective, we also expect that the district quality standards will increase our ability to deliver targeted technical support. So in current state, when we think about district level support for operations and again, those logistics of a district, we are really doing this based on the highest need in that moment. And this will provide us with a structured mechanism to address those issues and to provide the support that's needed by our districts rather than the agency, somewhat blindly guessing what is needed. So in the text of district quality standards, so component one being these new standards that were created, we have provided quality standards in business operations. This addresses budgeting and accounting, risk management and internal controls, personnel management and data management, facilities management and safety, and governance. In our upcoming work and in our work in developing these standards, we've worked very closely with the Vermont School Boards Association to develop standards that are applicable to them. We will continue that work moving forward, and we have begun some work in some collaborative work with both district business officials and superintendents, as well as VSBA, to try to parse out roles and responsibilities. Budgeting and accounting in particular was an area where both entities voiced some concerns around needing this rule really needing to be specific in the definition of who is in charge of what, right? So parts of the budgeting process fall to the district, parts of the budgeting process fall to the board. And so we've worked very closely with both groups to ensure that those concerns are addressed and that they will continue to be addressed in the quality assurance process. The standards themselves are focused on very critical or high leverage systems that support equitable access to high quality education. So that was the test in which we measured these standards against. Do these standards likely impact a district's ability to deliver equitable access to high quality education? And are they high leverage systems? Are they things that will provide the biggest bang for your buck, so to speak? They are focused on end results rather than prescriptive processes. So when we talk about the standards and how they are framed, we are looking for end results. The district achieves X. How they get there is dependent on the needs of that district and the abilities of that district. Again, these are standards that we designed to be attainable for all districts. So from our districts that are very highly proficient in this work, all the way down to districts who really need to do, have quite a bit of support to get to proficiency. And I feel that this is important. We've been discussing this a bit internally as well. DQS is not a mechanism by which EQS is comprehensively measured or reviewed. So we want to be clear that DQS and EQS are two separate and distinct functions. DQS does have 8 inclusions or references to EQS. Those were specifically selected, again, based on that system lens. What we'll be looking for on the DQS side will be evidence of high functioning district systems that support those 8 EQS inclusions. I will pause because I see Kimberly has her hand up.
Thank you. I think on that question, because we've been working closely in our committee with EQS and the accountability measure, is it, if it's required, it is, I think, required that the AOE determine compliance with EQS annually. What other mechanism? I mean, we have prescribed some things that they must report, and then I think it's the AOE's role to, determine compliance or ability to meet EQS, as I understand it, annually. So I'm just trying to understand, are they having to report 2 separate ways? What tool or mechanism will the AOE be using for that purpose?
I see Interim Secretary Boucher has her hand up. I'll defer to her for that.
Thank you.
Sure. So as we've shared previously, we currently, for all EQS, use a series of annual assurances that go out. Happy to share those with the board. I thought we had at some point, but if not, I'm very happy to share those with the board. And then our understanding and our intent is that for this subset of EQS, which we've all agreed upon and are now instantiated within the quality assurance aspect of DQS, we will be going into a deeper dive than the overall assurances. So at this point, we're not anticipating, for the next near term future that we would change that process. So the idea is we're continuing to use the assurance process, which has worked fairly decently, I would say, throughout certainly the past several years. But I think this is a good opportunity for us to learn a little bit more about some key EQS components that we've agreed upon should be part of our QAR process.
And just to follow that up, Heather, so a district would be submitting their assurances and separately their annual self-assessment.
Yeah, I think that's what we're going to be working on. So I think this is, we have not hammered out the exact details of that actual process, but that might make the best sense. We'll come to that when we figure out sort of like what this looks like from the practical perspective.
Yeah, and I think on that point, that's where the public comment that Tammy and I submitted suggesting it could be captured in one place if it were all in the DQS was why we were suggesting those levers that were important for determining ed quality be part of the annual self-assessment. But I understand it now to be living in as separate requirements, and it sounds like there'll be 2 tools that districts will be completing for that purpose. I just want to clarify.
Kimberly,
yeah, they're very used to the tools right now that they have, and they again, as I said, I'm happy to share those. They're pretty detailed, so they're very used to that. And then this would be a deeper dive for the subset that are now part of the quality assurance process.
Okay, thank you.
And Tammy, I do see your hand, and I'll kick over to you in just a moment. I have a few slides dedicated to dig into this a bit more in just a few minutes here. So if we'd like to table some of those questions, I do have some more information we can talk about there. Tammy, go ahead.
Yeah, I'm mostly concerned about, the items, there was all this work done on sort of the top items for DQS, with the VSBE around finance and all of that. In the process of developing the DQS, the items sort of this activity where, you know, we all sat around a table. Well, you sat around a table and I listened to you guys finding sections in EQS you wanted to pull out and put in the DQS. And then the conversation was, well, we'll think about how to, you know, implement this or deal with this later. And this sort of the interim, you know, the solution was just identify those. And I know, you know, we pushed back to have some additional sections of the EQS, you know, added to that list. I guess what concerned me though, Courtney, is I heard that there's been really no work on that, on sort of fleshing those out, and that we have an implementation deadline of 2025, but it's unclear whether or not we're going to meet that. So I'm wondering, like, what is the process? Like, we kicked this down the can when we wrote the DQS. Not we, you kicked this down the can and kicked the can down the road when you did the DQS by saying, well, we kind of ran out of time. We really didn't have time to do this now. So we're just going to invoke these sections of EQS and then write some guidance later. I guess my question, and I'm one of the people who asked for the update, is I'd like to know, like, when are we going to get to work on that guidance?
Yeah, absolutely, Tammy. I have some information prepared to talk about today. Would you like to skip ahead to that? I wanted to provide an update for the board, just again, a refresher on what the quality assurance process is going to look like. But if you think it would be more valuable to just kind of skip ahead to the project timeline, we could do that.
I'll defer to the rest of the board on that. Just, I'm going to have to drop off in a little bit. I really am very interested and mildly concerned that almost a year later, we're still sort of, well, we pulled a bunch of items. We didn't have time to think about it then, but we're still a year later not really having real clear on what we're doing. So if you've got a process, that's great. I look forward to hearing about it.
Sure. So why don't we compromise quickly, Tammy? I can provide kind of a snapshot of that right now. So if you need to drop before we get to that discussion, you'll have some info to work with, and we can certainly follow up offline. I will just start by saying, my team and I, my small team and I, are feeling very confident that we can achieve this work in the timeline provided. In terms of implementation timelines, this is probably one of the more forgiving timelines we're working with right now. And we've somewhat methodically carved out what these steps are going to look like so that we have at the end tools that are comprehensive and can integrate well with each other and are ready to provide a very clear public transparency dashboard or report. We are going to be focused on those three new components, the business operations, the facilities management and safety, and the governance pieces first. So right now, what we are doing is in early January, we are kicking off working groups again to build out the self-evaluation tool and a rating tool that would accompany this. The tool itself will be a proficiency scale of 1 to 4, and will leave space for a narrative justification for districts to provide more information about why they've answered in the way that they did in that self-evaluation tool. I believe, Tammy, you may be familiar with the kind of the brainstorming tool that we used last year, which we called quality scales. We'll be refining those documents, and what the rating tool eventually will become a self-assessment tool. Right, you select your rating, but also a set of very specific criteria and examples of proficiency for districts to refer to. So they will have a clear indicator of, in the budgeting and accounting functions, I'm going to self-assess my district at a 2 in certain functions because these are the criteria that we meet and these are the examples that have been provided. Some may evaluate at a 3, some may evaluate themselves at a 4 or at an advanced level where there's really high levels of integration and automation, and they can demonstrate that with the systems that they use. That work is going to begin the first week of January, and we're going to focus on building those out first. The reason that we want to do this is because the agency currently doesn't have technical support to further pad the needs of the districts when we're talking about business operations, right? We just now have an operations team that can start to build this out. So we need to build those resources, and we need some additional time to get those ready as well. Once that work is complete, which we're expecting, and I'm fairly confident that this timeline will work, we're expecting that business operations piece to be nearing completion this coming summer, or towards the end of the summer, early fall of 24. We will then start to reintegrate the EQS components as well. So using that same model of a 1 through 4 proficiency scale, space to include narrative justification, we will start to build out the self-assessment or self-evaluation tool and the kind of partnering criteria in those EQS elements. The agency has work to support this, right? Like we've been working with EQS for quite some time. We have technical support and resources. We have criteria identified that show, hey, this is what the agency would evaluate, or this is how the agency would assess proficiency in these EQS functions. So at that point, we will likely be shifting players again. And we'll start to bring in, we're not going to be relying on business managers to create criteria to assess curriculum. We'll be bringing in the correct stakeholders at that point in time to make sure that we are really defining quality well in those areas. I will also say that this is the point in which we will need to take a look at the existing assurances and try to establish where is their duplication, right? So to your comments, Kimberly, earlier around, are we requiring the same tool or the same work in two different tools of districts? I don't believe that's the intent. We do need to take a look at those assurances, but what we are expecting is that the DQS self-evaluation tool will be more detailed. So it may add a layer of evaluation or a layer of assessment onto the assurances that's not currently captured.
And when you do this alignment between the DQS and the EQS, I'm assuming that will be the updated EQS that reflects Act 1?
Yes, I believe so. I will also say we will be focused on the 8 EQS components that are referenced in DQS, right? So
well, I had them
yes.
open. Each one of those components has substantial revisions for equity in them. And so it's not sort of a situation where I think you're going to be able to take what you already have and translate it over, right? Because those sections are substantially revised in the updated EQS.
Sure, it's a good reminder, but yes, that is the plan, is we will take a look at what is current at that point in time, and our teams that work closely with EQS are standing by. They've been involved. We've again kind of been re-socializing the concept of DQS and what we're planning within our internal teams as well, so that it won't be, number one, it won't be unexpected, and number two, those teams have some time between now and then to start preparing, what is it we're going to need to contribute.
And how is this, I'm still unclear how this relates to the quality assurance process. Well, I mean, the continuous improvement process, the SIP, which is required in statute, right? And falls under the EQS. How are these, and this was Kim, and I wrote a letter to the agency about that. I'm still unclear, like, how do these two things work together?
Sure. This may be a good segue, Tammy, to come back into this kind of refresher about how the whole process works, and then we can dive into that a bit more if we need. So shifting a bit, and kind of we're backing up a little bit here, the quality assurance regulations are the second piece of the DQS rule that we're really focused on. The third component being that public reporting requirement, but that's a very small piece, and we can do that a different time. The process itself is meant to, it's meant to provide a connection between the new DQS standards and then existing provisions of statute, right? So we've established these new district quality standards. We've integrated the 8 EQS components, which we collectively selected based on our belief that they are representative of high functioning systems when done well. And now we need to bring that closer to the provisions in statute that really bring that accountability back to the state board, right? So we're talking about the sections of VSA 165, where we talk about state board hearings and evaluation of a school or district. Quality assurance regulations define those roles for school boards versus superintendents and district administrators versus the agency versus the state board. And it utilizes state assessment scores as a basis for AOE intervention and review. So this is really important when we're talking about DQS and that first section where we're establishing new requirements around operations and logistics. That data is not going to kick off the quality assurance process. What will kick off that process will be a review of state assessment scores. Those districts with below satisfactory assessment scores will then be selected to move forward into an intermediate review, which will be more intensive. We will be looking at their evidence of proficiency in district's quality standards, as well as evidence and proficiency in those 8 EQS components. Kim?
So if the only thing that triggers that is state assessment scores, and those are reported on an infrequent basis, what happens in a situation that is currently happening in Wyndham where there's not staff? Like, so there, if there's no other metric that triggers a review, what would the practical implications be in a situation that is real right now?
So can I jump in? I'm so sorry. This is
Sure.
Emily. If we could answer in the hypothetical rather than in any particular case, I would really appreciate it. But Courtney, you can absolutely answer that kind of scenario. Like, what if there were
Any other
red
conditions,
light?
honestly, other than, yeah, like any conditions?
Yeah, I would actually say I'm not prepared to answer that today. I would need to talk to Simmons and team to figure out what our systematic response to that might look like.
Is there, maybe as a follow-up then, is there a reason why that was the only indicator to prompt a review? I mean, state assessment data is a singular indicator.
Yeah, to avoid us going really far down a road that everybody would agree, let me just answer it this way. There's not one single way to find yourself as a district facing a state board hearing where some of those 165 consequences might be on the table, right? We're not precluding that complaints could kick off that process, that other agency information and substantiating concerns could kick off that process, right? What I think, Kim, you want to hear is, yes, this QAR process can also stand as information to use that 165 authority. So in a very emergent case, we won't have to wait for this QAR process.
Okay, so it's not, the QAR process is looking at only one indicator, that is student outcomes on state assessment data, as the trigger for a deeper thing, or no?
Courtney's going to explain that. I don't think it's right to say it's the only.
Okay, I'm sorry. I thought that's what the previous slide said.
I think Emily's saying that there are multiple tools at the agency's disposal, depending on the facts of any particular case, correct?
Absolutely.
Heather has had her hand up for a moment as well.
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify. I think, this hasn't happened yet, but it may have, with the superintendent completing the assurances and not being able to assure the things that are actually in the EQS. Even in an example that we might think of currently, that would be one of the pieces that would then actually kick in a process of digging deeper into that. I also want to caution us, though, that in statute, what we do have as an agency at our disposal still takes a very long time. I mean, we're talking about a 2-year process. So what we have, I think we are building some really good aspects of giving us more information than we've had, but the process of actually getting a school back on track still can take a fair amount of time. Luckily, I think most schools respond very well to our suggestion, advice, etc., that we provide them with technical assistance. So we have not really encountered a situation where we've identified, and Emily is completely right. Like, we have all kinds of ways of looking at any components with federal regulation that overlap with EQS. For instance, we have very sophisticated monitoring programs because we have to for those. So she's absolutely right in that we have a lot of different ways of getting information. I don't want to give the impression, though, that our option is we can quickly, make a school kind of function in a certain way or it's going to get closed down. That's just not an option. Nor would it necessarily be the best option either. We want to work with them to actually make sure that they're understanding what is not being met and then getting a chance to actually meet it.
So, and I just want to jump in. I'm sorry to interrupt, Courtney. I'm just pointing out to board members, we are almost at time with this presentation. We can certainly go over, but my concern is, Tammy, you had mentioned that you need to drop off. And if you need to drop off, that leaves us with 5 members, which is exactly enough to have a quorum. But if anyone else needs to leave early, then we're going to lose our quorum. So I want to make sure that we get through everything that's on our agenda today before we have to adjourn. So I'm just putting that out there because I'm just, we don't have a whole lot of flexibility with board members. So I will turn it back to Courtney, but thank you.
Sure. And Jennifer, thank you. I can move us along here as well. I think one other comment I just wanted to make, hearing some of that reflection in that conversation, this QAR process that's identified here, this is really specific to the DQS rule. This is not the only mechanism by which we can get to those consequences or provisions in 165. And I think that's what Emily Simmons was just trying to say, is this is one piece of multiple tools at our, excuse me, apologize for that, my phone ringing. It's one piece of one tool that we have at our disposal to get there. This QAR process is really specific to the creation of those new district quality standards and how we connect those new regulations into that provision of 165. Mohammed, I see your hand up as well.
Thank you. I appreciate this presentation. The question I have about assessments or states, let's say assessments, is there a plan to actually assess or review the standardized test in general presented to our students? Because so often I hear assessing students or assessing schools, but the tools we use to assess students or schools when did they last, or when have they last been reviewed ever? I'm concerned about that because often I see some tests that are not assessing what students are being taught. Yes, some would tell you or argue all tests should align with the Common Core standards. Have we or anyone out there taken this chance to look into really reviewing these tests being presented to our students? And I found it a huge burden that our students are constantly being tested. If you count, starting from this very first week of January, there is a test coming up, and they will be tested through March with 3 different tests. I am just concerned. I have nothing against tests, but I just want to ensure when we test students, we're testing them for a good purpose, and the testing is measuring what the students are actually getting.
Mohammed, I very much appreciate those comments. I will be transparent with you. That's not a body of work that I am assigned to that, or am in any way involved in, and it's not something that I've been doing along with district quality standards. So I will defer to, if there's someone on my team who wants to address that, take a minute to do that. Otherwise, I think that may be an item we could get the right people around the table to address at a later date.
Thank you.
Sure. So I'll move us forward again, just very quick overview of the DQS quality assurance process. It starts with a district self-evaluation, which will be annual. Again, that's measurement of, specific indicators of quality in those new district quality standards around business operations, facilities management and safety and governance, as well as the 8 EQS inclusions. That will happen each year regardless. That will be an annual event. Then we will engage in a 3-year intermediate review. This is that more intensive review. This part of the quality assurance is what is the catalyst to this, our state assessment proficiency scores. And so we will be, this part of the work that is coming up is we need to standardize this process and really make it, again, logical and methodical. The agency will be identifying a group of districts based on their assessment scores and engaging in a more intensive review. We do plan to use the same criteria as is provided in the self-evaluations to start that intensive review. So districts and the agency will not have two conflicting tools. And then at the end of the process, we would recommend corrective action and or technical assistance and or make a recommendation to the state board. So that's that kind of connection back into the provisions of 165. Heather, I saw your hand come up. Did you want to jump in there?
Yeah, I just wanted to clarify something that is also relevant to Mohammed's question. So thanks, Court. I think the intent here, and it's important for us to keep in mind, is that the state assessment proficiency scores are intended as one outcome measure of how students are doing. We recognize that it's an imperfect measure, but it's also balanced with what the system levers look like. So we're really trying to get at, and I recall that we actually looked at like a 2x2 grid. We're really trying to get at, so who needs the most supports, or who, the most technical assistance would be districts where the outcomes are not good for students and the systems levers in terms of the components we're looking at are also sort of struggling or not where they need to be. So I think that's really important, that we're not trying to over focus just on student outcomes. We're trying to look at the balancing act. For instance, you could have and this is the kind of work we need to keep thinking about. So you could have some systems where they're doing everything we've asked and their systems look great, but the kids' outcomes are still not where we'd like them all to be. And so how do we provide those supports for those districts? We could also have some districts potentially where none of those systems levers seem to be operating all that great, but kids' outcomes are fine. And so like we're really trying to balance these two components together to get at the best way of actually holding us all accountable, but also recognizing that they're distinct components. So I just wanted to say that because I think it's important. I don't want us to over focus on the assessments completely. Assessments always at the end of the day are one tool we look at as a state, as a district. There's a lot of local comprehensive assessment materials that our districts and our schools look at. We don't have access to that, but I think these are good questions to continue contemplating as we move forward. For us, this is a marathon, not a sprint. So we're trying to actually build a system that's sustainable, and we're at the first beginning stages of that.
Yeah, Heather, your timing is impeccable. That is how I would like to, I think, wrap us up here as well, Jennifer. I'm trying to be cognizant of time. We
just want to say
thank
you to Heather for coming back to that. Thank you. I appreciate that.
Yeah. Thank you. We designed this process to be thoughtful and meaningful. And so there's a component to this work, to the DQS work and the quality assurance work, that is really focused on AOE technical support. So what will the agency be providing to support those districts? That is not in the line of intensive audit style evaluation. We will be prepared to provide focused technical support for those districts with satisfactory proficiency. So again, thinking of the assessment data here, satisfactory assessment or high-level assessment, but below satisfactory processes. So if your systems and your operations are not satisfactory, but your assessment data is not is fine, we are not going to be subjecting those districts to an intensive review through the quality assurance process. On the other end of that, we will also be providing technical support for below satisfactory proficiency or below satisfactory assessment outcomes, but satisfactory processes. So to echo what Heather has just said, if the systems are working well and there's evidence that at a district level, these critical high leverage systems are working well and they're doing what they need to do, but the assessment data isn't demonstrating proficiency yet, those districts will likely not be included in that intensive review. And the intent here is to acknowledge that those districts that fall into that category of high system functionality, they're doing everything they can, the tools are there, but the assessment data is not quite satisfactory. Those districts are more likely to be higher in historically marginalized student demographics. And so we are not going to provide additional consequence. We're going to focus on technical support in supporting those specific districts and their assessment scores. Just as a reminder, again, we don't need to go through all of these. They are in your slide materials, but here are the 8 EQS inclusions. This is the work that will be pulled in likely in September of 24. And then to end, here's our last slide, just a snapshot of the work that we have on the table planned for our team. So in early January, really just after the new year, we will begin the refinement of that self-evaluation tool. We will be building a comprehensive, I say rubric, I'm going to attempt to not use that term anymore, but it's a truly robust tool for districts to use when evaluating themselves. So we need to make sure that they have very specific examples of the proficiency in each section in a consistent way. As we flow through this process, we'll be developing DQS technical assistance. Again, once we establish how we will be evaluating them, we need to make sure that we are prepared to support districts in that work. We can't just say, here's the criteria, go meet it. We need to have the tools readily available. And then we'll begin some beta testing with field. So really working with our superintendent representatives and other folks out in the business offices to make sure that what we've established is truly representative of high functioning systems. As that work is happening, so this is where things will start to occur on parallel tracks. As the beta testing for those new DQS functions are starting to, we're ramping up, we will then be pulling in our team of folks to be working on EQS integration into that same model. When I say EQS, again, I want to be clear. I'm talking about those very specific 8 criteria. It's not a full comprehensive measurement of EQS. That's a different set of tools. Then we'll start to work on some dashboard testing as we get closer to July of 2025. So again, what would this look like in terms of public transparency? And then once we are prepared, we will implement that annual self-evaluation tool and begin the 3-year identification cycle. So that is work that would occur after July 1st of 2025 when the DQS is fully implemented and effective.
All right.
I'll take the screen down unless there are any other questions on timeline. Okay. I appreciate your time today. Thank you for providing me a few extra minutes to go over. I think this is important work and we're happy to provide updates. We do plan to provide periodic updates as this work moves forward, particularly as we start to get more into that EQS space. So I hope to see you all again soon on this. And if there's time, Jennifer, I'm happy to answer any questions, but if not, then I would offer to folks that they can reach out to me anytime.
Yeah, Courtney, thank you so much. It was really nice to meet you and very helpful presentation.
Thank you so much.
All right, thank you. All right, so I'm going to go back and pick up item H. This is the State Board of Education's annual report to the General Assembly. I sent out a proposed draft to board members and didn't hear any comments back. So unless anyone has any last minute thoughts, I could go ahead and make a motion that we adopt the reversion of the State Board of Education's annual report to the Governor and the General Assembly. Okay, seconded by Kim. Any discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay, you have approved the motion and I will go ahead and get that linked to our minutes and put up on our website, but also I will send it out to be delivered to the General Assembly and the Governor's office. All right. Next item on the agenda is a modification of the scope of charge of the Independent School Approval Committee. And I just wanted to provide a little bit of background on this. So board members who have been with us for a little bit might recall that in December 2021, then Chair Olson created this Independent School Approval Committee. It was meant to be another step in the independent school approval process to ensure that schools were fully vetted before being approved by the board. To date, most of the requests for approval that have come before the board have involved schools serving the K-12 student population in more traditional settings. But Rule 2200 actually also encompasses tutorial programs, distance learning schools, post-secondary schools, and kindergartens. So I just, in a belts and suspenders effort here, I just want to make sure that everyone understands that any approval that comes up pursuant to Rule Series 2200 will be handled in the first instance by this Independent School Approvals Committee. So I'm just wanting to expand or clarify the scope of the charge. So before we put that to a vote, is there any discussion or questions? Are there any? All right, I'll find my language here. So with that, I hereby move that the State Board of Education modify the scope of the current standing Independent School Approval Committee's charge and authorize it to review the Agency of Education's recommendations for all applications for approval or reapproval that are filed pursuant to Rule Series 2200, seek additional information as necessary from any school seeking approval, bring fully vetted recommendations to the full board to formally accept or reject a school's request for approval or reapproval brought pursuant to Rule Series 2200, and for clarity, rename the committee the, quote, Rule Series 2200 Approvals Committee, end quote. Is there a second? Seconded by Kim. Any last questions or comments? Okay. Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye. Aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. I further move that the State Board of Education authorize its chair to appoint members to the Rule Series 2200 Approvals Committee. Is there a second? Kim's getting good at this. Seconded by Kim. Any discussion?
Should we assume it's the same group?
Well, I'm going to, once we pass the motion, I'm just going to, forecast now, I'm going to name the same people to the committee.
Okay, I was assuming this is necessary because the name changed.
Yeah.
Got it.
Yeah, in an abundance of caution, I just want to make sure that we have
Perfect.
properly
That's
stood
fine.
up.
I was wanting to make sure I was following. Thank you.
Sure. Any further questions or comments? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion is approved, and I will continue to appoint or reappoint Tom and Jenna and Lyle to the committee. So thank you, guys. All right. This brings us to our next agenda item, which is a Rule Series 2000 and 2200 update. What I would propose is that we go into executive session to meet with our attorney and then come out of executive session and summarize any, well, we're not going to take any action in executive session, but we'll come back out and have any discussion that might be necessary. So at this point, I move pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1 that the board finds that premature general public knowledge of confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the State Board of Education would clearly place the board at a substantial disadvantage. Is there a second? Seconded by Kim. Any discussion? Hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Hearing none, the motion carries. I further move that the board enter executive session to receive confidential attorney-client communications made for the purpose of providing professional legal services to the board pursuant to 1 VSA section 313A1 capital F. Seconded by Jenna. Mixing it up. Is there any discussion? Okay, hearing none, all those in favor of approving the motion, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay, the motion carries. So we are going to leave this meeting, and you should have a link for another executive session meeting, which I believe was scheduled to begin at noon. So that's the link that you will use, and I will see you all in executive session. Thank you. Well, welcome back, everybody. So just to finish off item M, which was the Series 2020-200 update, I do just want to let members of the public know public comment period has ended in both sets of rules, and we now have an EQS committee, which is processing in the first instance public comment for recommendations to the full board. And similarly, we've got a 2200 committee, which is processing comments in the first instance with the goal of making recommendations to the board. The board has been really clear about is that our goal has been to ensure alignment between the two rule series with regard to the substance of the rules that embody the principles and goals of Act 1. So it might be that there might be non-substantive language changes, just given the different governance structures or whatever between the two rule series. But the board has been clear that substantively, the rules should be the same in terms of applying the principles and goals of Act 1. And furthermore, during the public comment during EQS, the board signaled that comments that were received in one rule series would also be considered to the extent that they were relevant by the other rule series. In fact, that happened. I know both committees met yesterday, and there have been some comments received in EQS that are being forwarded to the 2200 committee. And similarly, yesterday, the 2200 committee had some comments that were received that are being shared with the EQS committee, which is to say there's a lot of cross-pollination going on, I guess is maybe the best way to put it. So going forward, we've asked Sarah Buxton, our attorney, to identify themes that are sort of consistent between the two rule series that pertain to Act 1. And just given the number of people on the EQS committee and the number of people on the 2200 committee, it becomes necessary as a practical matter to warn special meetings of the full board so that we can meet together, the two committees, and discuss these general themes. So what we will be doing moving into January is having a couple of meetings with Sarah to discuss these themes, sort of reaching some sort of consensus amongst board members, and then Sarah will take that understanding and craft language that is then, perhaps the same between both rule series, depending on what the issue is, or might have, minor tweaks depending on if something is slightly different from one rule series to the other. So that's kind of where we are with things. We'll be processing public comment as quickly as we can, but again, working really hard to ensure that there will be consistency between the two. Did I forget anything? Does anyone else have anything they want to add? So, all right. This brings us to future meeting planning, and I don't have a whole lot on my list of things. Actually, it's going to take me a minute to pull it up. I know we're going to have an EQS committee update. We'll have a 2200 committee update. We may hear from Katie Ballard. She was unable to be with us today. She was supposed to appear last month. She got bumped, and then I heard from her this morning that she was unable to come. So I think we will get something either in person or in writing from her in January. And my computer's still thinking about pulling up my little list.
Tim, while it's thinking, I was thinking while we were doing the approval of the updated capital expenditure funding, I forget even what it was called exactly, but if that's an annual thing that we're supposed to review, I know that there are other annual things that we're supposed to review, and I wonder if we were to think about a work calendar and where that cycles naturally, that we might be able to have a work calendar which has placeholders. Some of the other statewide boards I sit on, we know there's some requirements for annual check-ins, and we populate that in just an annual work calendar. Not to be more work for you alone. If that, I'm happy to help you with that. If we look sort of at our statutory authority and responsibilities and think about where that those requirements might fall in the course of a year.
Yeah, I mean, actually, that would almost make it less work, because every month I'm like, who haven't we heard from recently that we should hear from?
Right.
So
that's what I was thinking. Like, it could be pretty systemic, and we could look at that and then just have a skeleton calendar for the year.
Yeah. So, Kim, could I maybe, if there's no objection from other board members, could I charge you with coming up with a list of, people who kind of report regularly to the board? And I know, we've got Katie Ballard, we've got, now we've got the cough. And maybe.
And I think it'd be, in addition to just those whom it's nice to hear from, I just recall that there are some things we're supposed to be hearing from even the AOE on annually, or it's not committed to memory, but I know within our authority and responsibilities are some regular annual requirements that I think, because we often end up so busy with that, which is responsively taking our time, we don't always get to some of those more, oh yeah, we needed to check that. And I had no idea we were supposed to be looking at like capital funding or anything like that, almost 5 years in on this. So I don't think it's because anybody's trying not to do our job. It just caused me to think there's probably a more systemic way for us to have even almost like checkbox versions, even if we're just affirming. It doesn't require another big study. We've taken a look at it and we're affirming it. And that's good practice. It might help us.
Yeah, I think that's a great idea. Thank you. The only other thing I have on my list Gray, I'll get to you in a second. We've got a post-secondary school approval that will be coming up in January. So the new 2200 School Approvals Committee will be handling its first post-secondary school approval recommendation, and then we'll bring their recommendation before the board. Gray?
I was just wondering, in my time being on the board, we've talked a lot about in-person meetings, but that's never happened. Is that something that's going to happen? And if so, when? Because I definitely need to know well in advance before that happens. And I would also like to add in that I do think it's very important to meet in person, at least eventually, because there's certainly a convenience to online meetings, but I've never actually met any of you in person. And there's, I think, a downside to that as well, since we do have to also, as well as being convenient, work as a board together.
So I appreciate you raising that issue. And I'll give you kind of the perspective. It used to be that state board meetings were always in person, right? Before the pandemic, that's just the way it was. There were good aspects to that for sure. This was before my time on the board, but it did allow, a lot of communication that just sort of naturally happens when you're together instead of, staring at someone like it's Brady Bunch on the screen. The bad part about that is it was long for board members to travel, but it was also, even more importantly, long for members of the public to travel, maybe across the state to show up for 5 minutes of public comment. And then the pandemic happened and everything went remote. And then post-pandemic, I've been kind of trying to come up with what kind of hybrid model works. And what I have landed on is summer months are hard because school's not in session. And so that's maybe not the best time for the board to go visit a school. At the other end, winter months are hard because I think driving in a snowstorm is probably not what anyone wants. And I've learned, through speaking with Maureen and Suzanne, that having these hybrid meetings are kind of the worst of all. So it's either we're all remote or we're all in person. And what I thought made a lot of sense maybe is to have 2 meetings in the fall in person and 2 meetings in the spring in person. That didn't happen this fall, unfortunately, in part because the board I don't know about you. I was so busy, I could never really figure out where to have a board meeting. And I, threw it out to board members and no one ever said, I want to have a board meeting here. So it didn't happen. I can tell you it will definitely happen in the spring. We typically visit the school of our, graduating senior. So we will be visiting Aaliyah this spring. And I would like to do one other meeting in person just because I think it's a good idea. So what I'm forecasting is that April and May will be in person. One of those two will be, at Aaliyah's school, and then the other one, I am open to suggestion. So maybe by putting out that announcement now, we can get some good ideas and get that lined up. And then Gray, of course, will visit your school next year.
And I think for public, I wonder too if we can't have a less than ideal but possible hybrid option. I know just local school boards during the return to in-person manage to navigate that. So maybe we just talk about, from a technology standpoint, can the public still access us during those meetings in a way that's virtual? I think having this kind of access has been really helpful. And you and I were at a conference with Aaliyah, and I was even in a smaller session with her, and we had not met each other in person, so we didn't realize until after the fact that we had been in the same space together. So to your point, Gray, this is not optimal for the relationships that we build in the course of our work. And but I mean, maybe we just take a look at that. Is there any way we're getting better at navigating the hybrid, that we could do that as an alternative if you really can't make it or whatever? And for the public, I should say, at least.
Yeah. Rich and Jenna?
So both the supervisor union, our school board, has been doing hybrid meetings for 2 years now. We hired Brattleboro Television. They come up, they set everything up. We just supply them with the big screen TV, and they put mics out and a camera guy, and that way he can see who's talking, and then the public can be. And it's actually, I really hate them a lot. I've hated remote meetings because it gives a lot of people a chance to just get on and grind their axes, really easily. We had one lady who I think was pretty well lit up and cooking dinner, and we finally had to shut her off because she kept muting herself. But I think it does, like you said, Jennifer, it allows a lot of public to kind of input. People know what we're doing. A lot of people I've heard complain that we do the meetings during the day because they're at work and they don't have the opportunity. So are we just catering to the educators and the education system? So I think there's a lot of pros and cons, but I think if we could find a good group to do the meetings. I think at Wyndham Central, we pay like $400 or $300 a meeting, $200. And, they pretty much set everything up. We supply a TV, and there has to be a host computer. So I think it would make a lot of sense to look into it. And I can even, when we do our next Wyndham Central meeting, I can invite some of you all and you can see how it works. It's not that bad.
So, and I'm basing my comment on what I had heard from the agency, that logistically it's challenging. The sound quality was challenging. And I remember when we met, it was a year ago in October, when we were at, was it CVU? Something like that. And Tammy was remote and no one could hear her. It's worth reconsidering. I don't want to say no. I'm just reporting what I had heard from the agency.
So our meetings are actually online. We actually won an award because I think somebody thought one of our meetings was someplace from California. So we got like the third most views on the Brattleboro Community Television thing. So we got a little plaque for it. But again, if you have somebody who's used to doing it like a Brattleboro TV, I don't think it's that difficult. And again, I know we don't have a huge budget and help and stuff. But we've even had it where the superintendent isn't there or the administrators aren't there, but somebody from the board actually just brings, like this past Monday, my computer. I brought my computer and I did the I was doing the part on the TV so people that were alive at the site could see and hear, and then those that and again they bring some mic so that people can hear us and we can hear them, and it really works well. And it's not all that expensive, and even the state of Vermont being what we are, I can't believe they don't have the ability to set something like that up fairly easily if we're setting it up in one of our little school districts.
All right, thank you.
Maybe we're going to you, Richard.
Right, maybe we should go to Marlboro and have a hybrid meeting. Huh.
Well, that's what I was going to say is, we could talk to the superintendent and maybe do it at Leland and Gray, because we have done supervisory union meetings there, and it may be a good way to test the system out, see how it works.
Okay. Well,
I just need to start a little later than 8:30 if I'm coming for Grand Isle.
Well,
but the other thing that's nice about that too, Kim, is that if you don't want to drive all that way, I mean, we had the same argument in Wyndham Central. When I became chairman of the SU, I didn't want to just be the center of the universe to be the high school. So, we did meetings. We went to every school so we could see what was going on in different schools. But again, some of it was an hour and a half drive or 2 hours, even in Wyndham Central. To go from Marlboro to Wyndham, there's no easy way, and it was an hour drive, so you're 2 hours back and forth. So this would be the ability to say, okay, I'd like to go, but I can attend the meeting and still have a life type of thing. But so when it's closer to you, when we go to Grand Isle, I may not drive up from Dover to go to Grand Isle, but we can all still participate. You can be there.
Of course. And actually, I think when we've been in person, we have started a little later than 8:30 anyway.
Yeah, we've with the few times that we've met in person since I've been on the board, we've had sort of a morning to drive and get there, and then maybe do a tour of the school, and then lunch, and then start the meeting at 1 or something like that. So,
and we've had carpool options too, Gray. I don't know if we could. I know that back when pre-COVID, the student on the board was from a neighboring community, and we commuted together. So we can figure it out for sure.
All right. Anything else, Jenna?
I liked Gray's comment. Maybe have a bigger conversation, the whole board. I think you put something in the chat. I think we all have our own experiences of how hybrid has worked. I think for our board, what is the purpose, right? Like, is the purpose for everybody to come and be there together? So then we would be there. Like, we would make the commitment to drive across the street, down the state. Like, that would be, if that's the purpose of it. And then is the purpose for the hybrid option would be to allow members of the public who are not part of the board access to the board. If it's just to have a location, I mean, that's a different conversation. But let's see.
Well, as far as the public is concerned, I think also if we're not planning on switching to like all in-person meetings or anything, it's just occasionally, and it's still, we have monthly meetings, and in the age of technology, it's pretty easy for people to email us and make a comment in other ways. So I don't think it's the biggest concern that certain meetings would be very difficult for the public to actually go and make comments, but there are still lots of options for public comment and lots of meetings where it's considerably easier to go and make a public comment, because that's true of any of our online meetings. So I think when we hopefully do in-person meetings, I think the goal should be to make sure as many as possible of the board members are there and actually in person rather than hybrid.
And that is what happened last year. All board members showed up, so that was good. I will follow up with the agency about the idea of hybrid meetings and just see if there's any updates on that end. But in the meantime, I think, Gray, to your question, you can plan on in-person meetings in April and May, as well as members of the public. So with that, is there anything else? Okay. Hearing none, that brings us to public to be heard. If there are any members of the public who are still with us who wish to be heard, you can either raise your hand by pushing the hand icon, or if you're calling in, *5 to raise your hand. And let me just look. I'm not seeing any hands raised. All right. Then that brings us to our final item, which is a motion to adjourn.
So moved.
Moved by Kim,
Seconded.
seconded by Rich. Any discussion? None. All those in favor of adjourning, please raise your hand and signify by saying aye.
Aye.
Aye. All those opposed, please raise your hand and signify by saying nay. Any abstentions? Okay, we've approved the motion unanimously. We stand in adjournment, and I wish everybody a wonderful break and very happy holidays. Thank you guys for a great meeting.